Broadcast is live now.
Broadcast is live. We are online. Well, hello, Elaine.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you being my very first interview on the Indie End of Life Collective page. How are you doing today?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm good. As long as we stay inside, I'm good.
I know we were just talking about our beloved fur babies and how they're just not doing too well with this heat. And I think we're just trying to wait till the sun goes down and then, then we're coming out at night.
Yeah. Sounds a little like vampires, doesn't it?
I know, exactly. All right. Well, if you're joining us today, I want to welcome you, welcome our Indianapolis, and even if you're not from Indianapolis, if you're from somewhere outside, if you're joining us today, welcome. We have a really great guest today, Elaine. Is it Voci?
Correct.
Voci. Wanted to make sure I pronounced it right. And Elaine is a life coach. She's here local in Indianapolis. She owns her own private practice. Elaine is also a published author of 11 books, including Resilience Art, a grief coloring book. And we're going to make sure that we let people know how to access that later on. She's also written the 5 most harmful myths about grief. And Elaine is also a certified Life Cycle Celebrant. And she provides individuals and families in the greater Indianapolis area with funerals, celebrations of life, and other ceremonies that mark life's important transitions. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate what you're trying to do with this new project, and I know that it takes ambition and it takes perseverance. So I say, go, Angela.
Thank you. Well, I definitely am a huge fan of spotlighting people in our community like yourself who are making doing this privately, who, I consider people like you a small business owner, even though, it seems like you're doing really successful in your practice, but I really admire that you've gone out and have gone independent from sort of the mainstream hospital and institutionalized systems. So I'm kind of curious. I know I have lots of questions for you today. So I'm really excited to kind of learn, first of all, what got you into this work, I think is one of my first questions. And, did you start off more in the mainstream and then go private, or how did you sort of get to this place?
Sure. Well, when I finished graduate school, I opened my first private practice in Carmel with 5 other people, but I was like the president of the practice. And we were a counseling center, and the people who referred to us were family practitioners. So they would refer people who might be having some kind of stress-related illness or some kind of condition that, they would have complaints, for instance, maybe pain or something like that. And yet there would be all these tests given and there would be no real clear reason why they were having the pain. So they would send them to us. And we were one of the first counseling practices in the area to have our own biofeedback equipment. And in those days, biofeedback equipment was huge. It was like those great big audio speakers you see at performances. It took an entire room for us to have all the equipment set up. I fast forward to today, most of us could have the same kinds of tools right here at our fingertips on our computers. That's how big a change there's been. So I started out in private practice. I don't think I was ever really that drawn to working for large systems. I look back at my whole career, and I think most of the time when I was working for other people, working in a company or some type of an organization, even they were relatively small organizations. Now, there were two exceptions. One was USA Group, which had about 3,000 employees. They were over in Fishers. They were taken over by Sally Mae. And the other was an organization in Japan called Matsushita Electric, and they manufacture consumer electronics under the trade name Panasonic. They had somewhere around 250,000 employees around the world. And I was director of language training class and cross-cultural training class for them. And I lived in Japan and worked there for 4 years. So with those two exceptions, most of the people I've worked for have small businesses too. I just think some people are cut out for working in big systems and some are not. So yeah. I was glad I figured it out early, Yeah.
I think you just have so much more freedom to do some of the things that you want to do as a private practice owner. And that's been my experience. And that's why I decided to go independent myself. So
you have to be disciplined. Everything's a trade-off. So if you're going to be your own boss, it's great that we have freedom and we can manage our own calendar and all of those benefits. But you have to be a person with discipline. You have to be able to manage yourself as well as your calendar and make the decisions, put things in priority and so on. So you probably know all of those things and those don't scare you. So you're still doing it.
Yes and no.
On good days,
I'm a little
right?
bit. Yeah, I have days where I'm feeling very motivated, and then I have other days where I'm really good about giving myself space when I need space. I think this work it is emotionally taxing sometimes, and so I'm really good about listening to my body and knowing when how much I can take on and when maybe I need to step back a little bit and do something else. But that's why I try to get involved with a lot of different kinds of things that really feed me, so that I'm not just constantly running myself down with some of the things that are more hard. But yeah. So I'm really excited to learn more about your work, especially as a life cycle celebrant and a funeral celebrant. It's something that I've had so much interest in learning more about, and I was really excited when I came across you. As far as I know, and you might know of others like you in our community here in Indianapolis, but you're one of the only ones that I've met so far who does this funeral celebrant work. So can you tell us a little bit about what exactly does the funeral celebrant do, and how do what do they have in common with funerals, and how are they different? How are they celebrations of life that you conduct and sort of your traditional funeral?
Yeah, so a life cycle celebrant tells us through the title that this is a person who helps create ceremony and ritual around life transitions. So I perform weddings as well as funerals. You get the whole spectrum of life with a life cycle celebrant. That's my training. I did specialize in funerals because those were areas that just really drew me. I felt really attracted to that. And so it was a joy to go through school. I studied for a 1-year program that's based out of New Jersey, but it is an international program. And if you live near New Jersey, you can have live classes. But the rest of us, people who live anywhere but there, we do all of our learning online with teleconferences and so on. The celebrations of life and funerals are both end-of-life memorials and experiences for families to go through. And so they both really celebrate life. They honor the memories for that person who's passed away. They acknowledge It's a way for people who are grieving to acknowledge their pain and get support for their grieving process. In my experience, celebrations of life are less formal than funerals. They have more creative elements that personalize it, that tailor it to the person. And they usually take place on a date that is far from or away from the actual day of death. So for instance, a family I worked with last year, their mother had died in July, and the celebration of life didn't happen until the middle of September. Usually that's the case, I think, because in their family, their mother had cancer, and her death was somewhat prolonged, and she had lots of time to make plans. They talked about a lot of the details, and then she wanted to be cremated. So when that all happened, then they looked for someone to help them perform the ceremony, and they found me through the school. Actually, school has a little database and pictures of people and what areas they're from. Here in Indiana, I think there are about 5 of us, so that we aren't heavily represented in the Midwest. But if you looked at California or Boston, for instance, then you find lots and lots of people that are doing it. I think funerals more often follow more closely the person's day of death. Traditionally, they take place in a church setting. The elements are themselves more traditional. I think they're often in funerals, there are passages from the Bible and hymns and psalms. Many times they're led not by a celebrant, but by a minister, somebody associated with the church who's in, or a priest or some other faith community leadership person. The celebrations of life are really, they kind of resemble parties, you know? Yeah. And so there's all the things that are focused for the family. So this one that I told you about that happened in September, that woman was a fabulous cook. So they picked food from her own recipe list to serve after the ceremony. And then she loved country music, and they picked 3 or 4 different songs that were inserted in different places in the ceremony and afterwards, so that we would have an opportunity to experience her music, you know, what was one of her passions. She was a person who loved to entertain. She was very hospitable. And so there were elements in the ceremony that reflected that. One of the things they did, she has 2 daughters, they put her recipes on beautiful little recipe cards and had a little sign said, "Take one or more. And when you enjoy this food, you know, think of her." It was very, very sweet. So they're actually a lot of fun to do. They do both funerals and celebrations of life take on average about 10 hours of work on my part, because I have to call the various people that the family wants to have them say some things about the person. So they tell me stories. I have a series of interview questions that I ask, and I take good notes, and then I begin to build from all of that feedback. I build what's called a soul sketch. A soul sketch is kind of, yeah, it's beautiful language, isn't it? And that's one of the things about celebrant training is we speak in lyrical language. You're taught lyrical language. So we do a lot of poetry and a lot of lyrics from songs that are spoken in the ceremony. And by the time I've gotten all those interviews done, I have a good sense of who this person was and what they enjoyed, what they were good at, what meant, you know, what was meaningful to them. And then I write the ceremony. I've spoken with the family, so I know what they want in it in terms of people coming up and speaking and songs and so on. And then I give them that design. Now they get to approve it, make final approval. So for the family, there's no surprises when we do the ceremony, the celebration of life. They know everything that's in there. They've approved it all, and they know what to expect. I also have, I like to print it out on beautiful paper and tie it with a satin ribbon, and that becomes a keepsake copy. Because sometimes people like to look back. You know, they want to remember the ceremony, and they want to remember what was said and what kind of music was played. So those are some differences between funerals and celebrations of life.
Wow. I can feel myself like putting myself through that experience with you, and that just feels so much more like healing, just really like just very healing, and to have the surviving loved ones really engaged in that entire process with somebody who, like you, is just really skilled in holding that space and creating this really beautiful event. Like you said, it's like it's a party, it's a celebration. It's not, you know, I wish I really would have somebody like you when I was going through it with my mom. I think that the benefits are enormous, and really help carry through, really setting the grief process onto the right foot, and having something to look back on to say, wow, we really came together as a community and as a family, and we really remembered her for him or her for who they were. It wasn't just about, you know, obviously you're going to cry and you're going to grieve and you're going to feel those heavy emotions, but I just think like that's just so powerful what you're doing.
Yeah, and you know, I hesitate to say that it helps bring closure, because with grief, I think that door is often open. It's not resolved. You know, you may feel better about it years later, but you still have that little pain in your heart, you know. So I hesitate to say closure, but there is something akin to closure that happens for people just the same, because they are gathering, they've got family and friends around them, there's food, there's beverages, there's chance to be social with one another. The whole process, I think, has a kind of energy to it, and it builds as they talk, we plan, eventually the day arrives and we, you know, I facilitate the service, and there's something about that helps them let go a bit, surrender a bit.
Yeah. And I think giving everybody sort of a job to do, probably a piece of that sort of helps. I'm a big fan of ritual. I include ritual into my daily life, outside, I'm trying to create ways for folks to do that in grief. And as an end-of-life doula, that's something that I like working with families and folks on, is just about incorporating just simple little things. I look at ritual as like a container. It's somewhere to put all of those complicated feelings and emotions and to do something that's simple on the outside, but putting some intention into it and a purpose behind what you're doing, and really being present with that moment and every step that you're doing. And I think if you've never done ritual before, it's hard to explain it. It's hard to explain, but it's just been such an important part of my life and my healing that I understand the value of it more now than I have.
Many people have experienced ritual. I mean, a lot of our own cultural history as a country has had parts of ritual in it, and people just have taken it for granted or kind of forgotten it, you know. But you sound like such a perfect candidate to become a celebrant, because it is about the art of ritual. It is about the art of ceremony. It is the use of lyrical language and poetry and prose to create an emotional experience for people. And, you know, think of all of the ceremonies that we could have in our lifetime, the whole life cycle, from birth until death, and in between, weddings and baby blessings and new house blessings and retirement parties. I mean, the list is huge, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and you mentioned something earlier that is important when we're talking about sort of the differences between funerals and these celebrations of life and things like this, is that a lot of people don't follow religion quite as much as we used to a long time ago, where religion was a really big part of everybody's life 100 years ago. But now people are a lot more secular in their belief, or maybe just have different, spiritual practices. So this really allows you to take it out of that religious container if you don't relate to the more religious practices, and if you do, I think it's cool because you can still integrate that. But if you don't, you can really personalize it to suit whatever your culture is, your beliefs are, and so that's one of my other favorite things about it, that I think just fits in our day and age and sort of our modern way of living and honoring each other. Yeah,
absolutely. Pew Research does, I think about every 3 years, they do the same kind of survey, and it's to look at the role of religion and spirituality in American life. And the last report they did, it was close to 35% of Americans described themselves as unaffiliated. So they do not have a church that they routinely associate with, go to for services. And what happens when they want to get married? They don't have a priest or a preacher, a minister. They don't have a location. That's why celebrants really can step up and they fill that gap, because it's a growing number, just as you indicated, Angela, that people are not affiliated the way they used to be. And it's changed even just since 1950. It's changed significantly. You might also find this interesting, that the celebrant, the idea of celebrants originated in Australia. And the two women who started the celebrant school where I graduated spent about a month in Australia, and they went to all these different ceremonies and all these different rituals and talked with people about all the meaningfulness of it and how they approached it and the sacred space that they worked in. It was quite an initiation for them. And when they came back, they were even more determined to start a celebrant school, to create it for, people that live in the States. And now we have a program that's all in French in Paris, I believe. And we have lots of people in Canada who are part of it, and people in Asia and in South America. So it's also a richness to the training, because when you're a student in there, you're in a class with women and men from all over the world who are studying. So it's a very rich conversation that you have even in your classroom setting.
That's wonderful. Oh my God, I definitely want to learn more about this work. I want to make sure people can hear it okay. The only reason I'm looking down at my phone is to make sure, see if we have any comments, and to make sure that people see who's with us and people can hear us.
Sure.
So if you are watching, if you don't mind sending a comment that you can hear us and that you're with us, and if you would like to ask Elaine a question, please feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to sit here and kind of monitor the feed from my phone. So if I look down, that's what I'm doing. But
okay.
I know we have a little bit of like a 10-second delay, so it might take some time until people start responding to what I'm saying now. But we'll just kind of keep going and moving. If anything comes up, I'll just I'll ask and see if anybody wants to engage. But I do wanted to ask you, since this has just been such a stressful year for all of us, I feel like it's been hard to be a human this year, between the pandemic and a lot of the violence and things like that. So how have you been working with the bereaved during these pandemic times?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are different things that I tend to offer. Pandemics are really well. It's a pretty fascinating topic of how do you do grief work during a pandemic, and we need to look at the word pandemic. It has its roots in Greek language, and the meaning of pandemic is to reveal. To reveal. So it's a verb. We're all being shown the cracks in our society, our communities, our culture, the systems of education, health, and justice, our families and our personal lives. All these cracks are being shown to us because that's how the light gets in. And the light is the source of joy, is the source of wisdom, balance, hope, and creativity. We are never going to be the same once the vaccine is found and the virus pandemic is able to quiet and eventually be controlled all over the planet. So this is an opportunity, but it's also a risky passage. You know, we talk about celebrants help people through life transitions. Well, this is a heck of a life transition on such a massive scale. And the changes that are happening are sweeping in scope. And eventually, I believe that it will lead to a better version of us as people and of our culture. And think of all the different human activities that we engage in on Earth. Like the 550 astronauts who have left the planet and looked back at the Earth from the heavens, that beautiful blue marble floating in the dark velvet of space. We are crew members on planet Earth, all of us. There are no passengers. We are all together. We are all connected around the globe, and we are all responsible for what happens next, what takes place. So what happens to one of us happens to all of us. It's a time of great losses and sadness and grief. So people need to understand grief, need to understand the parameters of it and how to cope with it and how grief is helped. And I think that's where our work comes in. My work as a life coach and as a celebrant and as a writer is to be available to serve the needs of people, to grieve, to be helped to make peace with what is ending and what is gone for good and what will never come back. Humanity is being given a huge course in grieving. We are confronting death directly. And you may know already you may already be well aware that we are a death-phobic culture. Mm-hmm. We worship youth. We are afraid of getting old. We don't know what to do about aging. We don't know how to have grace about it or a peace about it. And it is now in our language. Death is in our language as it has never been before. We see death right in front of us. We see it on the evening news. We watched the murder of George Floyd, and that opened a huge crack. And a healing light entered that crack because we were afforded the chance to watch this beautiful family go through this elegant leave-taking and honoring of George, who he was and what he meant to the family, and now what he means to the world, because the world is grieving with America. The world has entered the protests against police violence and violence in general, not just from the police. So this healing light has entered the domain of race relations. And we are confronting a challenge nationally about how to live up to our ideals. America is an idea. It is a country, but it is based on an idea. And whether that idea will transform, whether it will take more of the light than the darkness, is up to all of us, because what happens to one of us happens to all of us. So regardless of age, everybody is facing possible illness and possible death from this virus. It's an equal opportunity disease. It attacks regardless of age, occupation, education, location, and gender. We are all in this together. And it has the potential, this pandemic, to unite the world against this common enemy of a deadly virus. But we have to engage with our wisdom and with our love, rather than with our competitiveness and our desire for domination or dominance. I think grief counselors and bereavement coaches can make a real contribution in helping to comfort people, helping to educate them about grief, providing support and compassion. I just wrote a blog for it's a monthly blog that I write. It's associated with my newsletter, and it's also on my website. The newsletter is going to be completely revamped. I just suddenly found myself bored with the way it looked and the way I was working with it. And so I got some help, and I've got a whole new newsletter coming in August. I hope that it will help men and women, but because one of my sweet spots now is helping women in their second half of life, I hope that this is going to help them face that challenge that we're all facing collectively.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
My goodness. I could listen to you talk all day.
Well, I hope I won't subject you to that.
I'm really hoping that we're visible. I'm a little nervous, I'll be honest.
Well, technology is a bane of all of our existence. Sometimes it works and it's awesome, and sometimes it doesn't.
Well, worst case scenario, best case scenario, I'm not going to say worst case, but I really want to have you on again, because I feel like there's so much more that, more to learn about you. And,
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, what gives you your greatest pleasure and really, the greatest happiness in your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I bet you can imagine. I bet you could probably answer that question for me. I have a sense we might be kindred spirits. When I think about the greatest reward for me is always in my clients. It's what their experience is. When people seek out the services of a coach, something's not working for them in their life. Something may feel out of balance. They're missing something, or they have their eye on something else that would please them, and they want that, but they don't know how to get that. And so seeing people gain in confidence, seeing them grow more comfortable in themselves, recognize their own personal power and apply it to the world that they live in, especially in those areas where they've been experiencing struggle or difficulty or dissatisfaction. Generally, as I see them become more at ease in the world, more happy with life, the degree to which they express their pride and pleasure in their own growth, in taking ownership of that growth, I love hearing, I feel so much better. I love hearing, I feel so much more relaxed. I feel relieved. I feel so much more positive than when I first came to you. And I'm so glad I found you. Those are the words that make my heart sing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You know that you're in your purpose when you get types of responses. And
exactly.
I think I'm still working in my own growth to, I mean, end of life care has been my passion for many years now. But it's really about coming into me as even in my own power first. And I have to take that really seriously before I can attempt to help somebody else. And I've gone through a lot of my own healing for the similar reasons, because I don't feel comfortable trying to help somebody else go through a healing process when I have a lot of unhealed wounds that still need tending to. And so I lost my mom at an early age when I was 19. And that really impacted my life quite a bit. It still does to this day, you know. Like you mentioned earlier, you know, there's no closure in grief. New milestones happen in my life all the time where I think, boy, I wonder what it would be like if she could be here and be a part of this event, this situation. So it's an ongoing process for me, but it's been a process of transformation too, in a lot of ways. So
that is one of the miracles of life, isn't it? And I think you said it well, something tragic or terribly disruptive and sad happens in your life, and then this miracle starts to occur where you begin to realize where you once told yourself, I don't know how I'm going to live anymore. I don't know how I'm going to live past this, through this, but you do. And you do, perhaps with the help of other people or books that you read or people you talk to, or a coach maybe has a role to play. Something helps keep you going and you make progress without realizing it. And then the day comes when you realize, I don't feel that defeated anymore. I have felt like there's been a shift, and there is transformation that happens for human beings. It's oftentimes part of the story of grief is the transformation, and it's turning something that's so painful into something that's so positive, that has been revealed in you and revealed to you that you are a part of. And so now you're able to take that pain, and it's like it's old alchemy, you know, they took the dull and made it gold. And that's kind of what happens in our own lives from the tragedy of things that occur. We are transformed. We are made over in some way, and we become capable of bearing other people's joy and other people's sorrow. It's like our heart didn't break apart, it broke open. And we
it broke open.
Hold.
Yeah.
It broke open. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much for like all of that you do, and for sharing like just a fraction. I know this is probably just a fraction of, we could talk all day. I know we could. I want to make sure that, you know, hopefully if we are live, that people know how to reach you. I'm going to share, let's see, I have your email address here, which is Elaine Voci at elainevoci.com. That's your email, correct?
That's my webmail, yes. So you go to my website, you can communicate with me through my webmail account there. Yeah.
Yes, and your
website the website is www.elainevoci.com.
Okay. Well, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really, really am so grateful for you, and I hope we can connect, you know, again in person at some point. I'd love to just share more with you. And I know that you were doing some events prior to the quarantine around grief and loss. And that's really how I found you. I went looking for grief support and folks in Indianapolis, and you came up. I was on purpose looking for people who are not grief counselors, who are just more independently based practitioners and advocates of this work, who are kind of out of the box. So I would love to collaborate with you more in the future, and I'll definitely be in touch. And if anybody wants to reach out to Elaine, please do. And
thank you so much, Angela, and many blessings to you for the good work you have begun and will continue to engage in, I know, going forward. And I just had this little fantasy of you and I sitting on comfortable chairs under a tree in front of one of the ponds there at Cox Hall Gardens in Carmel and having a talk over a cup of tea, maybe.
Let's do it.
I look forward to connecting again. Blessings to you.
We do too. Have a beautiful evening, and I'll be in touch. Okay.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.